Hey, this is Dr. Kelly Cagle, and for season 3, we're doing things a little differently because we know that a healthy and happy dad and mom starts with a healthy and happy husband and wife. So I decided to bring along my husband, Josh, as co-host so we could share some real life stuff of the ways that we learn how to fight to make our marriage thrive. You are listening to season 3 of the Parenting IQ podcast, Learning to Fight. Welcome to episode 5, where we're going to be talking about if these walls could talk. And this is a really fun conversation because if you've been around me for any period of time, like a couple of days even, you've heard me say that a lot of times you never know what's going on behind the doors of a home. Right. And Josh he came up with this topic and he's like, Kelly, I think that this should be the topic for next week that we talk about if these walls could talk. And the point behind it is a lot of times they are talking through our kids, right? Mm-hmm. They are the walls of our home going out, being influenced by what mom and dad, in our case, Josh and myself, are saying. A lot of times they're just mirroring what we're doing. Right? So that's going to be the topic of discussion today. But before we get going with that, all the funnies that we've got to share and all the fails and all the successes that we've gone through, I want to remind you that if you go to YouTube, our YouTube channel at Dr. Kelly Cagle, you can find these episodes. Not only that, you can watch some shorts that we've been doing on Facebook and also on Instagram, both at Dr. Kelly Cagle. You can find tons of resources in all of these platforms to help you strengthen your marriage, your marital relationship, also your parenting, right? There are strategies that we are putting out and putting forth with resources and tools to help you raise lifelong learners and use every moment as a learning opportunity, whether that's through fighting with your spouse, right? Mm-hmm. Or through your kids. So visit all of these platforms, subscribe. And one more thing, if you go to drkellycagle.com, Josh is always my feedback that I get from the weekly emails that I send. And a couple weeks ago, I sent one with 3 tips to make the 3 lessons that I learned that week. And the final one, the 3rd lesson was never run out of chocolate. And he laughed at me because he knows that really is what I live by. We don't run out of chocolate because if we do, it's just not good for me. And so you can get those emails. They're typically very helpful. They're things that the Lord laid on my heart for me to share with you. You can subscribe to those weekly emails at drkellycagle.com as well. So we're so grateful to have you listen. If you share this with a friend, and also if you can leave us a review, that would be very, very beneficial. Because a lot of times I have people that message me or they come to me in person and tell me that they've learned or listened. And I don't do the best job. In fact, I just told somebody today, I don't do the best job at stewarding the wonderful feedback that I get from you guys. So if you would be so kind to write things out, whether you DM me or write the review on Apple, Spotify, or Google, I would be so grateful for that review. So it doesn't slip my mind because everything seems to slip my mind lately. So I thank you so much, you guys, for listening, for sharing, for being here. Now let's talk about our walls and if they talk, if they could talk.
No, I think whenever we're going through these things of if what goes on behind closed doors, I just always try to imagine when you're driving through a neighborhood, how are people doing? How are people living? How are people thriving or striving or whatever it might be,
or failing,
or failing? And in many times in our lives, I always think about what goes on with our kids. Sometimes I'm that kind of guy who I spit out some temper. I'm like, what's going on? And sometimes I'm very short with the kiddos or just in my own, like I've shared before, trying to fix a toilet or whatever we're doing, sometimes it's very, very quick and loud. And what I've noticed is then when I see my kids outside interacting with others or even with themselves outside of the home, and they're loud or sharp and short with people, I'm like, I don't like that in y'all. And I then go to correct it. But then I start thinking, how much are they a reflection of maybe what they've seen inside the home and how I've been living. You know what I mean?
I do. And I will say that I've shared before that we homeschool. And so our kids are with me every minute of every day. So they reflect me 99% of the time, right? Because we spend a lot of time together. And so they learn a lot of things. And I had actually a friend that a couple weeks ago, she shared on her stories. And I've had this thought too, that when she shared that, I was like, oh yeah, I've had the same thought, that if you want to see, if you want to have a reflection of how you've been acting lately, just sit back and listen to your kids play. Because the way that they interact with the Lego pieces or the dolls or the horses, whatever it is, a lot of times the way that they are talking is how they've heard you talk to them.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And many times I don't like what I hear when they're talking. But as we try to listen, and we're not here as a group trying to say how bad we are in parenting or how bad we are acting as individuals. We all know that there's room for growth, and that's the whole purpose of this podcast is how can we grow in better communication through fighting. And so what we're in here discussing really is just we can self-analyze sometimes through our kiddos, through how maybe they are communicating with sharing, or, sometimes Titus and Micah being so close in age, they play together a lot. And then you'll see them get really, really, ticky-tack.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it can be, that's mine, Micah, and I'll see them try to get in each other's face a little bit. And it's like, whoa, guys, that's not what I hope you guys interact with, but yet how am I trying to help influence this? And many times as a father, I can be very, very stern. And what we learn about our Lord is that he's very gracious. He's slow to anger. I'm like, oh Lord, help me so much to just slow down to that anger. I don't know. I feel like many times I'm fast to anger.
Yeah.
I'm in the opposite.
And I think that's really good. That's a good thought to bring up, because whenever we think about choosing our battles wisely, which is the first thing that we cover every week, you think of the big topics that are going on in the world right now. We're just giving examples about little conversations that we have here or there. But whenever you think about the big things that you really want your kids to be influenced by from you want to influence your kid in these areas of racism and politics and all of the agendas and cultural agendas that are taking place right now in our kids. And whether you are you're homeschooling, you are private school, or you're public school, wherever you are, it doesn't matter, because your kids they will interact with other kids, and they will hear things that, whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter, because you want to instill those ethicals and moral beliefs in your kids, right? And in our case, we want our kids to be biblically sound, to have that structure, that foundation, that we want to influence them in these areas. So when we choose our battles wisely, even in our fighting in those areas, and I want to even include fears, right? And I think that when I think about fears, when we first got married, before we had kids, I learned that you had a fetish against bees and wasps.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, those are, you always make fun of me about that and stuff. So many times when I look at our kiddos, they start to freak out, or at least Levi in particular, because many times I am a freakazoid about a bee, or we've got a lot of dirt daubers at our house, and they don't really mess with you much, but yet I see one buzz by, I'm like, oh my gosh.
But that is because you have a history. In your childhood, you were attacked and all these things happened.
Yeah. But still, I don't know if it's as much just that, or if it's as much the fact that I'm just a freak of anything. I see a spider, I'm going to go and kill it. There's just little things. I mean, I think one time I was in the flower bed and a bee buzzed by me, didn't mess with me at all, but I think I almost pulled like my hammy or something trying to get out of the way of that daggum thing. And so what we see now, though, is that I'm looking at my child or whoever in the flower bed, and they're freaking out. I'm like, hey, don't worry, but yet I'm in that moment, right? Yeah. And I do their very same thing. So when we talk about these silly examples. And then when you want to get into these real
Deeper
examples or
ones.
deep examples of this race and politics and all these different items that are very, very, very sensitive in our culture, I think so many times we need to make sure how we are speaking about those topics or how we are communicating our feelings on these topics. You know, I mean, I'm a firm believer that racism is learned. Politics are learned. They're all learned behaviors, learned influences, and sometimes they are just so deep that you almost didn't even realize how you learned them. You just kind of were born that way in this world and age, you know. And so, I think when we look at just these outward things that we see in our kiddos, we got to take a step back, you know, because communication, like we talked last week, is verbal and nonverbal. It is so many important steps to learning how to communicate.
Yeah. And I think even with whenever you think about cultural differences, which is something that we have in our home. I'm from Brazil. If I haven't shared before, during season 3, I was born in Brazil, moved here when I was 11 years old. And so when we get together with my family, I might have shared before, I think, that whenever we fought, you and I first got married and started fighting, because that just what happens, that I would get really loud. And you're like, why are you screaming? And in my mind, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? I'm not screaming. Culturally, we are a loud people. In my house, you know that whenever we have Christmas or, I mean,
the birthday song.
Yes. Oh my gosh. All of my friends that come to birthday parties, they look forward to hearing the Portuguese happy birthday song. Because the very first time they heard it, I have one friend in particular who's like very calm and she's like, I heard it and it was never ending and everybody's clapping and there's all this screaming.
It's upbeat.
It's upbeat. It's not this happy birthday, right? And so I think that that's our culture. And so these differences, even in our home, that we teach our kids to see others regardless, because God created all of us. And so instead of one is better, one is worse, this ethnicity is better, that is not good enough, color, languages, accents, all of these things. And I've had, whenever I was doing my master's, we would take these examples, these little tests, and it was just a picture of a person and it was a certain color of skin or a certain look, you know, as far as like what they were wearing and how you would feel and you would respond. And that was a moment for me that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even realize I had these things.
Absolutely. A lot of that they talk about is profiling and things like that. But, you know, inside that, again, we have to always understand that as parents, we get opportunities to see what's going on in our kids' lives and then kind of do a gut check. You know, we were talking a little while ago where Levi is in the age of you know, kids starting to cuss and do different things.
He's 12,
and he's really, it's in his mind. And so many times when we talk about what type fighters are we, right? We got to decide, well, what are we going to stand for, and what are we going to basically succumb to?
And last week I called that our fighting culture. So thinking now of our home culture.
Yeah, I mean, inside that, I try to share with Levi. I said, you know, there's nowhere that we're going to go where people you're going to not hear these type of words. But even you can take a good word in the wrong tone.
Exactly.
Right. So just because you might or might not struggle with cussing or whatever doesn't mean that you can't use a good word in a bad tone and it be a bad word. Right. So I think what we want to first, though, just say is when we, you know, as our kids are exploring, they're getting older about cussing. I mean, obviously I don't stand for that. I'm around it a lot. And that's not something that I have decided to be a part of or allow as best I know how in my life, especially currently. When I was younger, I participated in all those things. But I feel like we want our children to not pick up those habits here.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously they're going to probably, explore
Mm-hmm.
and share those type of things.
Mm-hmm.
But when they do, and we find out about it, the opportunity we have of correction is very, very pure and very clear because we do not participate in that. It is an easier teaching mechanism now than it would be if we participated in the cussing environment all the time, right in front of our kids, and then we're going to try and tell them, hey, don't do this.
Exactly. You mentioned, and I've used it almost every week, that our kids are watching, they're mirroring us. And even a lot of times, whenever it rains or something like that, which it hasn't rained in Texas lately a whole lot aside from this weekend, but sometimes the kids ask to go play in the mud or whatever takes place, like being kids. And you are such a germaphobe, taking it a little step further. You're a bee a phobe, but you have a phobia with bees and wasps, and now you're also germs. And
I didn't know on this podcast that we were going to pick on all my weaknesses.
Okay, well, these are good. No, these are good ones to share because you. So often when they said, I want to go play in the dirt and do all these things, you're like, no. And just last week, I looked at you and I said, do you remember what it was like being 12? And you're like, oh, you're right. I do remember. And I did play in the creek. And and for example, I'm using that to even go back to the cussing example, is that we did partake in that because we were kids once. We did mess up. We're not perfect. Just now in our life, not just, but as adults, we decided that this was a path that we would choose in our family as our home culture, that as best of our abilities. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. Sometimes, and I will say that I slipped not that long ago when I hit the golf cart into a post and I was like, oh my gosh. And, and I was like, dang it. But that's 100% the reaction. It's not a natural, a common, my go-to response. It was just a reaction to a thing that I was like, oh my gosh, I really might have messed up here. This could cost us money and whatever. And so at best to our abilities, it doesn't mean we're perfect. It just means that we are striving towards something.
Well, I think for all of us, we've all talked about in this fighting, we think about, conditioning, and we think about how can we, again, if we were going to imagine ourselves as a fighter stepping into a ring, there are so many different conditioning moments that need to take place to prepare us to step into this ring. And life is consistent. Life is every day, it says live each day as though it's your last. Think about that. How could we do that? I fail, I think, at that almost every day, to imagine if this was your last day, what would you either say? What would you do to the people around you or with the people around you if you knew that this was your last day? And I think if we could live in that moment, we get caught up so much on the busyness or the to-do list or all the things that might be pulling at us.
Yeah.
And so inside this home, if these walls could talk, would they be able to express the love, the joy, the peace, and the patience, all the things that we talk about that maybe as a family, you can sit here and you can think, hey, this is what I want our family to be about, right? I want our family to be a family of joy or have a culture of peace and all these different things. But every day there's a reason for it to get robbed. There's a reason for the distraction to come in. And so what we want to do is come alongside parents and say, hey, we're not going to lose this day. We're going to win this day. We're going to fight for this day. Inside how we communicate, because we can't control how the world communicates to us, but what we can control is how we communicate back to the world and to the people around us.
We go back to Jesus's, whenever he was asking, and Father, what's the greatest law? And he said, first one is, the greatest commandment is to love your God. And the second one is to love your neighbor. And then he stopped. There were two.
Yeah.
And as a culture, instilling that in our kids, not just in our kids though, in us as well.
Mhm.
And that going to our next point of respecting one another. So often we are so, with what you just said, the busyness of life, the demands, the world, the noise, the filth can rob us of that mission of loving God and loving people. But I think it needs to be a constant reminder. And that's why we have, under respecting one another, to call out the good things in one another.
Yeah. I think in one another and even in yourself. Because, if you have a healthy view of yourself, then you're also able to have a healthy view of others. Many times we go back and we've talked about this before, that log in your eye versus the speck in someone else's. So many times when we look at our situations, that we need to make sure that we are the people that we think we are, right? How many people would want to follow you? How many people would want, and not doing it for those reasons, but just really kind of understanding that, hey, the best, if we were to love well, you can only control yourself, right? We can influence others, but we can only control ourselves. And if we're going to communicate, when I'm at my best, when I'm at my just killing it in our relationship as a married couple, or even in fatherhood, I am in the moments of, I've done the right things to take care of myself, whether it's getting the right amount of sleep, eating correctly, spending time in the Word, just really, helping myself create good habits.
Yeah.
When those things are running well, what I tend to see is my family's running well, right? And when things get off track, there's probably somewhere that could be pinpointed back to, a bad habit that got picked up.
One of my habits that with all of this that we're saying, that I really try to implement in my life as a instant thing that just flows from my mouth constantly, is that life with my kids, especially because they are with me all day. So if I'm speaking life over them constantly, telling them how much I love them. I don't even know how many times a day I tell the kids I love them, each of them, that I tell them something I love about them. Just a second ago, I told Titus, I said, don't tell anybody, but you have my favorite eyebrows in the whole entire world. And these little things that I want them to remember, that I want to speak life over them about, because, and I even wrote this in the Bible study that I wrote for kids, God's Promises as Waves, which you can also get that on my website. But it's this triangle that goes from your mind, so from your thoughts that penetrate into your heart, that become part of your belief system, these things that you believe about yourself, that then go to your mouth. And this is biblical. This is in the Word of God.
The mouth speaks.
Yes, out of the heart, the mouth speaks. So it's this triangle that if you go back from your mouth to your heart, your mind is that filter. And so if you can filter your thoughts to only allow life to penetrate into your heart, you're only going to speak life through your mouth.
And what are we saying, though, is how well do you communicate with yourself? I know that can sound a little crazy, but how well do you communicate, or how well do you take those thoughts captive? And so inside these walls, I think about, people that buy homes and all the makeup shows of redoing homes and this, that, and the other, and they can be so beautiful. And we can look at all the amazing things that go into that. But if you have an unhealthy family, it doesn't matter how pretty that home is. All that's doing is just kind of just putting Band-Aids over things. What I would rather have a just holes in the wall home and with a healthy family than the reverse. And I think that we all share those same desires. It's just sometimes we either feel like, hey, we messed up and we don't know how to reconcile. And most of the time, how we reconcile is, again, in communication. It's humbling ourselves. So how are we going to respect one another? We respect one another by deciding, hey, I've messed up, but I'm going to communicate, even though I might not want to. I might, and maybe it could be that it might take more than just that moment. Like you might have to take some time, like what we've talked about before, to pause before you can come back around. But if you knew, guys, that you messed up, whether you said something or did something to your spouse or children, or even a friend or coworker, whatever it might be, or whoever it might be. A lot of times we need to make sure that we set our pride aside, lay it down out of the respect for ourselves and what we know that this other person is, and humble ourselves, ask for that forgiveness, because that reconciliation is so important to moving forward.
And I think even through speaking life, you can be calling out these things, in each other, in our kids, in ourselves. Is, the Bible also says that if it's, and I'm paraphrasing here, but if it's not a good, life-giving thought, word, then it's not from the Lord. And us recognizing that, wow, I'm such a failure. I mess up all the time. Here I go again, making the same mistake. Why would Jesus forgive me once again? I just did the same thing. And those are not true. They are not true thoughts. And so us making sure that filtration system in our mind, God, take that away right now, that it doesn't penetrate in my heart, and that it doesn't become a grudge towards one another, towards our kids, or, because we are all sinners. And so we can all do play a role in helping each other have a good filtration system in our minds.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, whenever we talk about if these walls could talk, think about when people come over to your house. They're not coming over to see the house. They're coming over to be with you.
Yeah.
And so they're getting into your culture. They're getting into the relationship that you share when you invite someone in. And so really be encouraged that, hey, these walls, there's no telling what they show. And if you don't like what they look like, or you're saying, hey, I want to repaint these walls. I don't like what I see. Well, then repaint them. Repaint them with a new color, a new freshness of life, a new perspective. Again, I believe that it starts with ourselves before it. You're the one that needs to pick up that paintbrush, as that individual, and start painting the wall. If you don't like the color that it looks like, paint it yourself as to what you want it to be. But once you do, then remember, hey, I don't like painting very often, right?
You hate painting.
I do hate painting. So I want that color. Pick the right color. Pick the right communication, the right attitude, the right direction.
And what happens when you are choosing a paint color? It takes a long time.
Yeah.
And a lot of times you even paint the wall with 5 different whites to see which shade you want to stick with. So it takes work. And talking about that home culture, going back just for a second, that home culture, we don't have it written down, our mission, a family mission statement, but we know it. And it's all centered around the fruit of the Spirit, because that is what we want to be going forth, what we want to be pouring out. And so as our home culture, we speak this to our kids often, we speak it to one another, and we speak it to ourselves, that although we are, different people, we are raising individual people. You and I are on the same team, but so are our kids. We always say we are Team Kegel. We are the Kegel crew. And so what are the Kegels about? We are, as best of our ability, we're walking out in the fruit of the Spirit. Even when we fail, we still come back to love. We're loving, and we are joyful, and, all of the things. And then I end with self-control, which I talked about too. And that's one that I hammer on all the time, because I am in a household with 3 boys, and that self-control is something that I really want them to grasp.
Yeah.
Because it all goes back to that. If you can control yourself, you are controlling your actions, your words, your thoughts, your behavior, all of the things. You have a lot to give when you are you have this mastered, your self-control mastered.
So, good luck.
Yeah, thanks. It takes 2, right? And so if you like this episode, I want to encourage you to share it with a friend. We're so grateful that you're here. As I just said a minute ago, we are 2 different people. You are 2 different people, but you are on the same team. So get together, choose your paint color, do your work. Make sure you choose the right one to make it stick, so you don't have to repaint it, so you can learn how to fight. And if your walls talked, what is being said outside to the world? We love you guys.